bring back the democratically elected government on board. You know, like we said, it wrote the Senate yesterday, seeking the support and initiating the Senate on the communique that were reached in ECOWAS. And of course, we have Bish Johnson, Captain Bish Johnson, a former U.S. Army. He is going to be talking about the odds against ECOWAS. You're welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
A very good morning to you. Okay, so like I said earlier, that President Tinubu wrote the Senate, and he sent some communiques reached during the ECOWAS meeting. There were 7 communiques, so we are going to be addressing them one by one. Now, the old sport, everybody's looking at, you know, the president. They want to know what the president is going to do concerning this. First, let's us take an overview before we go into the communique. Let us take an overview of what you think our move against the coup plotters in Niger will cost ECOWAS and West Africa.
Okay. Well, it's unfortunate that we're where we are today. You know, whether in terms of the coup or the ultimatum that is given by ECOWAS, I don't believe that you have to use force as your first option. However, every option must be on the table. But the use of force or military intervention should be the last option. It should be after you have made serious effort, not just effort, but very serious effort to use political and diplomatic means to resolve the problem. In terms of what it's going to cost, of course it's going to cost a lot of treasure. It may cost even blood of not just those in the military, but civilians who may die as collateral damage should there be military intervention. Look, unless we are not interested in permanently resolving the problems in some of these francophone West African countries, because if you look at, you see the 3 countries that had coup in recent years are all francophones, and so that tells you that there's a common denominator. There's something that is driving those coups, and that is what ECOWAS needs to focus its attention by trying to find out why is it that those 3 countries that had recently had coup in their countries are all francophone. These people have accused France of high-handedness and interference in their independence. It's like they are held hostage by the French. So those are the areas where we have to focus attention. Any solution that intends to solve the problem permanently must take into account the grievances of these countries. And I think that that's where the energy should be focused on, trying to find out why the coup. You know, because if everything is working well, I don't think there will be coup. The coup is as a result of bad governance and, like some of them have said, interference in their military affairs and being held hostage by the French. If you look at the ordinary people in Niger, they seem to be happy with the coup. Yeah, they seem to be very, very excited and happy with the coup.
Actually.
Exactly. And so who is governance about? Governance is about the people. And if the people are happy with the coup, it means that there is something fundamental, you know, in those countries, and those fundamental issues must have to be resolved if the problem has to be solved permanently. Unless we want to do a band-aid solution where we just go and we restore the democratically elected president whom they have accused of being a puppet of the French. Now, unless that's what we want to do, you just restore him today, and tomorrow those problems will still persist, and we have to go back again to even restore, to solve the problem at a much higher cost, both in terms of treasure and blood.
All right, okay, yes, like you said too, the masses, a greater part of the masses, you could see that they are for the coup plotter, you know, and it brings me worry that these decisions that ECOWAS is reaching may be also imposing something on these same people But I'm also worried about our borders. We share border with these people, and I recall the times federal government have closed, bordering states. It has really brought uproar from these bordering states, including Nigerians. So what impact do you think that these measures, some of these measures, will cause on the states sharing borders with Niger?
Well, there's always unintended consequences of every action. Whether it's sanction or military intervention, there will be unintended consequences. And so those border communities are going to suffer from those unintended consequences, because I believe that there must be some kind of interstate trade and transactions that go on along those communities in the boundary. So if there is sanction or military intervention, all of those transactions are going to be impacted. And if those transactions are impacted, the lives of those citizens are going to be impacted. So there will be unintended consequences, whether it's sanction or military intervention. But I think ECO has put itself in a bind. They were too quick to have given this ultimatum. That matter ought to have been approached even more diplomatically. Look, we're going to adopt political, diplomatic measures. Nevertheless, all options are on the table. Instead of setting a deadline, and so the deadline they've set now has put them under pressure, that if these people don't restore the former president to power, we will have no other option than to take military action, because we want to redeem our image and our standing before the world, because they had already given an ultimatum, and they even gave days in which this has to happen. I don't think that should have been necessary. I think that even though military option ought to have been on the table, we should have made serious effort and serious commitment in terms of political and diplomatic solutions to resolve this problem, especially when it's a country that is your neighbor, that has also been cooperating with us in terms of dealing with our own challenges, whether it's Boko Haram or ASWAP. We don't want a situation where Niger Republic is going to become a sanctuary for Boko Haram and ASWAP, where they will now have a home base where they can from and be launching attacks on Nigeria. So that's why these issues have to be we have to be very, very, very careful in how we manage this particular problem.
All right, okay, so let's go to the communique. The #1 communique reached was that close and monitor all land borders in Niger Republic and reactivating the border drilling exercise. We've spoken about that. Then cutting off electricity supply to Niger Republic. Let's talk about cutting off electricity supply in Niger Republic. Don't you think that is just a little bit teaser to what is about to come?
Yeah, like I said, we reacted too quickly and too harsh. Even personally, I wouldn't be in support of cutting off that electricity supply, because I believe there must be some, bilateral agreement reached between Niger Republic and Nigeria before Nigeria began supplying them electricity. And so by taking this action, we have unilaterally violated the terms of that agreement, which is not good in international diplomacy. I think that serious and concerted effort ought to have been made. Like the people that have been sent to Niger Republic to go and talk to the military junta, all of those options ought to have been exploited before we take these harsh and rash decisions. Because at the end of the day, it may not even be the leaders of the coup plotters that will even suffer the consequences of some of these actions that we're taking right now. It will be just the same ordinary people that we want to protect, and so there has to be a balancing act in some of these decisions and actions that we are taking.
Yeah, but talking about the agreement, if Nigeria had an agreement, I'm sure Nigeria had the agreement with the previous government, not the ones who just overthrew. No,
Nigeria had an agreement with Niger Republic.
Niger Republic.
Irrespective of course, government will come and go, but the state is a permanent entity. And so those who are signing the agreement are not signing it for themselves. They are signing it in the name of their country. So whether it's the civilian administration or the military administration, the fact is that the agreement was signed between the state of Nigeria and the state of Niger. because those who drafted that agreement must understand and must know that government comes and goes, but the state is the only permanent entity in that instance.
Okay. So part of the communique, okay, number 4, preventing the operation of commercial and special flights into the and from the Niger Republic. Then number 5, blockage of goods in transit to Niger, especially from Lagos and eastern seaports. We've talked about that. Then embarking on sensitization of Nigerians on the imperative of these actions, particularly via social media. This is really very interesting because a lot of ever since it happened, I've been reading a lot of speculations. People do not even really know what is really happening. Some have been in support and against, and some northern leaders are against it. They're against using the military intervention or military action against Niger. I'm sure it is because of these same factors that you have listed. But why do you think northern leaders are rising up against this kind of intervention? Why particularly northern leaders?
Because most of the states that share boundary with the Niger Republic are in the north. And of course, if there's military intervention, those states are going to be impacted. Don't forget that some of those northern states share some kind of cultural affinity and relationship with some of all these countries in the northern borders. So of course there will be more concern, and if should there be situation of refugee, it is those states that are going to be most impacted, because they will be the first states that those refugees will get to, and so it will create some kind of socio-economic problems for those states. So it makes sense that they're the ones who are rising up now and speaking against the military intervention. But it's not just only them. I am not from northern Nigeria, but I don't think that military intervention in this instance, without addressing the rudimentary and fundamental cause of the coups in those francophone West African countries, is necessary. We need, every solution must include the reason why those coups are taking place in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and now in Niger. I think there's also Guinea-Bissau also. Now, we have to address those problems. If we don't address those problems, we are only dressing the wound. We are not actually treating the wound. Those concerns must have to be addressed.
Okay, so with all this put in place, because with the communique sent to the National Assembly yesterday, I think the President just hinted the National Assembly on the decision that has already been reached. Do you see any likely war? I know you spoke about possible collaboration, ISWAP, and all of that, but do you see a possible war that can affect Nigeria and the ECOWAS community as a whole? Looking that Niger is just, how people look at their manpower and their war size, that Niger is just a smaller country.
Yeah, Niger may be a smaller country, but Niger may not be alone. We've had instances now where Mali and Burkina Faso had declared that an attack on Niger is also an attack on them. So what is going to happen now is that we're going to end up Africans fighting Africans, West Africans fighting their fellow West Africans. And don't forget the fact that there may also be some geopolitics in this thing. The West and Russia are waxing, for influence in Africa. Only recently, the Russian president cancelled about $28 billion worth of debt that African countries are owing Russia. So Africa is now the new frontier for geopolitics. So I won't be surprised if Russia is backing the military junta and the West, is particularly France, is the side of Nigeria. But whatever the case is, Nigeria must make sure that it extracts an assertive commitment from whoever that is backing them, so that we don't end up in a situation like what happened in Sierra Leone and Liberia, where we had a coalition of forces that went into those countries to restore normalcy, and at the end of the day, it was like Nigeria was the one carrying the entire load. We lost blood, treasure, and blood in that process. So we have to ensure that the commitment is watertight if we are going in there. And also, one thing with military operation, there's what we call mission creep, right? You go into military operation to do A. When you get there, you discover that you will not have to do more than A. You will do B, C, D. Because if you don't do B, C, D, E, you will not be able to achieve A. It happened to us. It happened to the US in Iraq, right? We went in there with the intention to remove Saddam Hussein from power within 72 hours. We ended up staying in Iraq for more than 2 years, right? Because when we got there, the country just collapsed. The things that America never anticipated was going to happen happened. Their police officers, police people quickly removed their uniform and threw them away. So we went from military operation to law enforcement. Civil servants refused to come to work. The people who are supposed to turn on electricity were not turning on electricity. Those who are supposed to turn on water were not turning on water. So US was forced to bring in private civilian contractors to come and man these very vital sectors of the Iraqi economy. And at the same time, there were police officers, US police officers, coming into Iraq to do law enforcement work. So we have to critically look at all of these things before we do military intervention. As a result, because of, so that we avoid what I call that, what we describe as mission creep, of going to achieve A, and you find yourself, you know, having to do B, C, D. In fact, going to nation building. You know, so those are the things that we have to be very, very careful about.
Yeah, you're very right. There's even an adage for it, which says that I don't know how I'm going to put this. I have to speak it so that I will be able to. But let me interpret it how it is that when you're going for a battle, you cannot preempt your own move. You have to preempt the possible move of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves that that person can give you. Okay, so since you are advising or you're suggesting that force is not the way, what would you advise or what would you suggest that ECOWAS do to tow a path of truce, to tow a path that, you know, that will be manageable for, you know, both entity?
What I would personally recommend is that we'll sit down with the military junta, not just in Niger, but also in Mali and also in Burkina Faso, and find out what are the fundamental problems that have led to these coups. You know, we've said that, look, coup is bad. I agree it's bad. You know, democracy is the best. But there are some instances where democracy has to come after you have laid a foundation, a rock solid foundation for democracy to thrive. If that solid foundation is not laid before you bring in democracy, democracy won't survive. You know, even us, we have practiced democracy since what, 1999? We're still facing our own challenges, you know, of democracy. You know, even the outcome of our election is questioned. Is being questioned. Even the legitimacy of the president himself is even being questioned. So you see that democracy is noisy, is messy, is difficult. It's not something that you just achieve, you know, at a go. That foundation has to be laid if democracy must thrive. There is a reason why these francophone countries are organizing coup and overthrowing democratically elected governments whom they believe are puppets of the French. They don't feel that they have actually gained independence from the French. So the solution has to be a solution that involves and includes those complaints. It may be that this current Nigerian president may not be restored to power immediately, but there can be an understanding between ECOWAS and the military juntas. Look, okay, these are your grievances. Okay, let us work together to resolve those grievances. But there has to be a timetable within which there has to be, you know, restoration of the normal governance, you know, democratically elected government. There be a timetable, and I agree timetable between them and the and ECOWAS leaders. Is when you do that, you're not trying to solve this problem permanently, unless we don't want to solve this problem permanently, unless we just want to kick the can down the road, you know, restore this civilian president and then leave. After 1 year or 2 years, another group of soldiers will not strike again and take over power again, because we have not addressed the remote causes of the reasons why the coups are coming up at this time.
Okay, but now that these coup plotters have taken on the aims of affair, do you think it will be piece of cake, trying to tell them, bring back the power? Because you just made it seem so easy. We just talk to them, we just, try to identify the issues. Aside identifying the issues, do you think it will be something that they would want to really let go of?
Yeah, if there's an agreement, like I said, there has to be an understanding, an agreement with them. I have said I don't support the use of military force. They can't be in power forever. They have grievances why they struck. All this why the civilian president has been in charge, right? They didn't take over power, but they recently decided to do so. And so it means that somehow, somewhere, they still have there's still that element of that thinking of democracy in them, and them subjugating themselves to civil authority. So if we talk with them, understand the reason why the coup took place, ask them, okay, what is it that needs to be done for you to restore normal constitutional order? Then from there we can work out a timetable that will be agreeable by both parties. It may not be an overnight thing. It may not be, those problems may not be problems that will be resolved in 1 week or 1 month. It could take, 6 months, 1 year, depending on what the issues are.
Okay, all right. Let's take this comment from our social media session, which says, with Niger coup plotters forging alliance with other African nations, should ECOWAS and AU begin to take holistic approach towards discouraging coup in Africa?
There's always reason and need for us to do that, but like I alluded to earlier, there are so much things going on in Africa that democracy will not thrive. When you have people rigging elections, when you have judiciary not being independent, when you have leaders who are sit-tight leaders, somebody being in power, only one person being in power 40 years, 50 years. If you have those kind of situations in Africa, coups will take place. If we want to stop coup from taking place, there has to be good governance. If you look at the places where democracy is thriving because the fundamentals are there. There is good governance. There are social safety nets for people to survive. But in Africa, that is not the case. There are some leaders in Africa that have stayed for more than 4 decades in power. Yeah. And so tomorrow, if the military strikes to remove such a leader from power, you say they should restore constitutional order. So why didn't you prevail on that leader to just do 1 term or 2 terms and leave office? So as much as AU, ECOWAS want to stop coup will continue to take place if some of all these anomalies are continuing to happen in Africa. We have to restore the fundamentals of democracy by laying the foundation for democracy. You cannot be declared a winner of election if it is not clear that you have won it. The judiciary has to be independent. No leader should serve more than 2 terms or 3 terms, depending on what your constitution says. If we don't do those things, coups will not stop.
Okay, so I'm sure it is just this that you're saying that is bringing another comment about your perception of African leaders amending their constitution to extend their tenures. There's been this call for a single tenure, the amendment of constitution for a single tenure. What's your own take? I know you have talked about it, but this is a direct question on it.
Personally, for Nigeria?
Yes, for Nigeria.
Personally, I would prefer a 6-year
single
term
tenure,
for Nigeria.
Okay.
Because what is happening with this, you do 4 years and then you do another 4 years, is that after the first, they will work first year, second year. 3rd year, they're already planning. In fact, they start planning for another election as soon as they're sworn in, right? So you are not talking about the next generation. You're talking about the next election. And so, for me, I would suggest a 6-year single tenure, so that once you're elected, you have 6 years to do everything that you want to do, right? And there will be no planning for another election because you're not coming back. So that way you'll be more effective. That is what I will prefer, you know, instead of this, you know, 2 terms of 4-year tenure. I think the single 6-year tenure will be more productive.
Yeah, so do you think that, apart from Nigeria, do you think that this constitution, one way or the other, should also be extended on other regions? Because, you know, like you said, that it is because of this sit-tight power, this power tussle and this power-hungry sit-tight people for presidents and head of states who have sat for more than 4 decades, like you mentioned. So do you think that it should be extended to other regions too? If
possible, if it can be done. But unfortunately, what is applicable in Nigeria may not be something that is applicable in all the other African countries. And I don't think that there's any provision in ECOWAS charter that, you know, gives ECOWAS that authority to decide what the constitutional term limits of, you know, presidents of their member states will be. If ECOWAS can achieve that, fine. You know, it will go a long way, because there's always, elections always create problems. There's always problems with elections, you know, tensions and fight and this and that. So if you can reduce the number of elections by just increasing the term limit to 6 years, single 6-year term, and that will eliminate some of all this friction and tension that come with election. If ECOWAS can achieve it, I think it will be better than what we have now.
Okay, so let's examine this whole coup plotting and the charade that has gone on so far. And of course, let's just take a look at some snippets on social media. A lot of people have said that France, of course, have one-way influence, just like you said, one-way influence, you know, the Francophone countries. And we cannot deny that we also were colonized and we also have this influence. So in their own rights, should they be able to tell France the limits they want to, how they want to be controlled? You know why I'm asking that? The reason is because we, one way or the other, too, have one way or the other been, you know, we're still under colonialism in quotes. So they wanting to pull out, won't it have consequences on them?
See, independence is independence. Freedom is freedom. There is no half freedom. You know, if you are going to gain independence, you should gain full independence. Be a sovereign nation. You know, but let me also let me correct. Those that are colonized by the British, right? Though the British still have some level of influence in those countries, but their influence is very limited compared to that of the French. If you look at some of the countries that were colonized by the French, they've had issues with them. For example, there was a civil war between the French and Algerians. Algeria was also colonized by the French. The Algerians had to fight to liberate themselves from the shackles of the French, right? It's the same thing that is happening here with these Francophone countries. The British don't have that kind of influence on their own their previous exactly. They don't have that level of influence. The influence they have is that they can, you know, through financial assistance or, you know, advice or manipulation of a few individuals, be able to intervene in our internal affairs. You know, sometimes they will make a recommendation or write a report, like you've seen with the EU report on our election. But they don't have that kind of influence that the French have over their own former countries that they colonized. And so that overbearing influence has to be reduced. It has to be limited. Those people should have autonomy, 100% autonomy, 100% independence. You know, and the influence of French, let me tell you also, the influence of French is also affecting even we who are not the Francophone countries. Because ECOWAS ought to have adopted one common currency. The problem is these other Francophone countries are using one currency, which is the one that they are sharing with the French. And so it's making it difficult for these Anglophone countries that have their own various currencies to be able to bring them on board, you know, get rid of the currency that they are all using and have one common currency. And so that level of influence has to be reduced. It has, in fact, it has to be eliminated. And from what I understand from what is unfolding in these countries, because there is the only common denominator in these countries is the French. So the French is the problem. Any solution to this problem must have to it must involve them and tackling the overbearing influence on those countries. That is the only way to permanently solve this problem. These countries are beginning to rise up. It used to be that if you don't support them, if you're not their puppet, they will eliminate that person from office. That was how Thomas Sankara was killed, because these are the people that had identified this problem a long time ago. And so they fought it. And that was how he was killed. But these military people now are now standing up and say, look, enough is enough. We have to take total control of our country.
Okay, all right.
By the way, if you pay attention, the U.S. has not called this thing a coup. The U.S. seems to be the only adult in the room.
Oh, okay.
I am telling you right now, they seem to be the only adult in the room. They are yet to call this thing a coup because they are studying the situation.
All right. Okay. So, with the back and forth and all that's been happening, how would you rate the French intervention so far? As far as this crisis? Yes, as far as this crisis, and how would you adjudge their intervention, the role they are playing? Well, so far I have not seen much from them. I can say their response has been measured. They've condemned the coup, and they have asked that the military juntas restore constitutional order. That is what they are supposed to do. There is no military intervention, at least from the surface. I don't know what they are doing behind the scene. I don't even know if they are the ones behind ECOWAS, who are inciting ECOWAS to go ahead with military intervention. So I can't speak to that. I don't know what they are doing behind the scene. But on the surface, they have been measured so far. All right. Okay, so still talking about the coup plot in Niger, we'll go on a very short break. And when we come back, we still have a lot in stock for you. Please do not touch that dial. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we've been talking about the coup plot in Niger, the odd against ECOWAS, and we have Captain Bish Johnson. Captain Bish Johnson is a former U.S. Army and also a social commentator. All right, okay, so we'll just wrap up with the last question now. There are a lot of, comments about the Nigerian troops that are going to be sent to, address this. And they are thinking that with the problems we have, do we still have that, lassity of pulling some of our troops to go and sort other spaces out? Yeah, sure. We can wiggle troops, from one place or the other. But, it's like an opportunity cost, right? If you move troops from here to somewhere else, you have created a gap or lasses where you are pulling those troops from, and with the current security situation that we're facing in the country, our own internal security challenges, vis-a-vis there is Boko Haram swap in the northeast, you still have the bandits in the northwest, you got farmers herders problem in the north central, you've got non-government in the southeast. You have, crude oil theft in the south, Niger Delta. The only region in the country right now that seems to be at peace with itself is probably the southwest. Now, so with all of that, our resources are stretched far thin. Resources both in terms of the military, the police, that we need even more boots on ground in Nigeria to even tackle our own problem, instead of going to now divide those resources to go to Niger, because whatever you remove from here, you have created a gap in that area you are pulling those soldiers from. I understand Nigeria is a much more bigger force than the Nigerian military. I think I understand it's about 33,000 manpower army personnel and a few Air Force people.
but it's not how you judge war. It's not necessarily in terms of, the numbers. Also, in terms of equipment, Nigeria is a much bigger force than Nigeria, but so is the problem of Nigeria. Nigeria has a lot of challenges, internal security challenges that it has to take seriously and address. And it costs money. Anytime you remove a soldier from his permanent duty station to another place that is not his home station, that soldier is like a baby. You are responsible for everything about that soldier, including even washing their clothes, their food, accommodation, everything. As at the time that the U.S. had 150,000 soldiers between Iraq and Afghanistan, America was spending $5,000 per second because they had to provide everything for us, including drinking water. We were not eating food from the Iraqi market. Everything was brought from the U.S. to us for fear that anything you get from there could be poisoned and then that you kill the soldiers in mass. So the U.S. avoid buying anything from there. Instead, they were bringing everything, including drinking water, from the U.S. So it's expensive. War is expensive. And considering our dire economic situation right now, I don't think that military intervention in another country is a very wise decision. Because you can decide when to go in there and what you want to go and do, but you may not have control of what is going to happen there and when and how the whole thing is going to end. And so the best thing, as I continue to say, is political and diplomatic solution to this problem.
All right, thank you very much. That is where we will be calling it a wrap today. That's where we'll be drawing our curtain. It is really, really a very detailed one. Thank you for coming on the show to, talk about and dissect this topic.